Thank you. So I think as the director of agronomy, I'm a part of the geek squad. That's okay. Today I want to talk about the sulfur fertilizer, and it's the fourth macronutrient, and I'll go through my talk. And we have this emerging issue, and it's a great opportunity for AgTech. And so Nutrien has that innovation pipeline, and our AgTech is in the formulation of the fertilizer. But there's plenty of room in the ecosystem to help find that sulfur deficiency. I mentioned the agronomy piece, and I hope all the growers in here and all the ag retail folks have that geek squad ready to go, because as an agronomist, I'm the one who gets the call. If you want to go to the next slide, please. I get the call. It's usually early in the morning on a Sunday, and the grower says, "What's wrong with my crop?" And so that's where the geek squad gets activated, right? And so we have this comparison here where we're looking at healthy corn. That's the tall green plant there. Great looking corn, has the full nutrition program. But the farmer's asking me, what's wrong with this one? And that's that spindly little yellow guy. And if I told you, if you don't treat that little spindly guy, that's going to cost you 34 bushels an acre. That's what some work out of Purdue just showed. If you don't treat that, and for the finance folks that were just up on there, 34 bushels an acre loss, maybe use last summer's corn price, just calculate that out. And so what is this issue we're looking at? This is sulfur deficiency. And sulfur deficiency is caused, it's a good news story, and I'll talk about why. But we need that sulfur to make chlorophyll. We need that sulfur to run the nitrogen metabolism of the crop. So all that urea you just purchased, or UN32 or anhydrous, you've got to have sulfur to make it all work. So you see that issue, and you see that yield penalty at the end of the day. So I get the call. I find those plants, and I start looking for, who do I blame this on? So in the next slide, please. I'm going to blame this guy. Anyone want to yell out who this president is? Richard Nixon, yes. Next click, please. Specifically this moment. This is December 31st, 1970, so a few years before I was born. But this is Nixon signing the Clean Air Act. And the Clean Air Act, it was an amazing success. We've grown our economy by 64% since then, but we've reduced our air pollution by 42%. Great success. One thing we've cleaned out of the air is the sulfur that used to come down on our fields, and I'll show you some maps, and it was a free sulfur fertilizer. We've cleaned that out of the air. One of the bad things about sulfur in the air, in a good way, it's a fertilizer. In a bad way, it causes acid rain. That's not good. So we have this sulfur issue coming up as a consequence of the Clean Air Act. And if you might mind clicking again, we're starting to see sulfur deficiency. So here's a way, if you just think about what you're going to have for lunch today, wheat production, sourdough bread, not having enough sulfur, not having enough yield, here impacting your diet. So if you click on the next slide, you can see the map. And I want to draw your attention to 1990. That's in the top row of the slide. And look at the red. That's where we had a lot of wet deposition of sulfur in the form of sulfate. And if you convert the wet deposition, because that's really a term for acid rain, if you convert it to fertilizer, some of those areas in red were getting up to 50 pounds an acre of free sulfate fertilizer. Lots of free stuff. If you look where we're at here in the Red River Valley, we were getting about 5 to 25 pounds of free sulfate in the air on every acre. But you fast forward here to 2015, down on the bottom row, a lot of that red's gone. This is that success of the Clean Air Act. We're cleaning the sulfate out of, we're scrubbing it out of the coal-fired plants, coal's being ramped down, of course. So a good news story. But if you look at the free sulfur, we really turned off that spigot. So now we're down in a lot of the eastern United States and in the northern plains, we're getting 0 free sulfur per pounds out of the air, or up to a measly 5 pounds. Keep in mind that 200 bushel an acre corn crop, you're going to need between 20 and 35 pounds of sulfur to grow that crop. So we've really changed the math. And if you go down to the next slide, please, here's just the budget. How has the sulfur budget changed? We've reduced our sulfur inputs. That's the free stuff coming from the air because of the Clean Air Act. In our soil, where we store a lot of sulfur for later, we've also seen some changes in soil organic matter and some of those fractions of soil that contain the sulfur that can be used by the crop. And then on the yield side, since 1990, we've increased our yield. Our average corn yield has gone up by 55 pounds or 55 bushels an acre. If you convert that into sulfur demand, we're pulling about 6 more pounds of sulfur out of every acre than we were back in 1990. So we have tremendous removal and we have less inputs. So I hope that's not how you're running your own finances at home. Not a good way to be sustainable for your own budget. But here, that's how we've been running this sulfur piece. So if you go to the next slide, please. As a result of this mass balance issue, we're seeing sulfur deficiency popping up more and more in places where they've never seen it. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, never had to worry about sulfur. Now we're seeing corn with sulfur deficiency, that yellowing at the top of the crop. Next slide. We're seeing it in wheat, and then we're also seeing it here in soybeans if you click one more time. There we go. There's my soybean picture. So lots of issues, and if you go on to farm Twitter, which is a good place to be, you see lots of pictures like this. What's wrong with my crop? And it's all about the sulfur. So lots of more attention. So if you go to Nutrien's commitment in our pipeline of innovation, if you mind going to the next slide, we're working on formulations to get more sulfur in the crop and make it easy for the grower to work with in their logistics. So if you mind clicking, I got a couple clicks here. Here's a happy plant, right? If any of you played Plants vs. Zombies like 10 years ago, you'll recognize it. That is a happy sunflower. That, if you click again, that plant is full of sulfate. That's the form that we pull the sulfur in. We use sulfate, so that's where you have to have it to make for your happy sunflower. That's immediately plant available. The plant can put it to use right away. They can use that exact chemistry form, and it's in the organic matter. It's in simple fertilizers. However, when you get a rainstorm like we've had over the last few days here, that sulfate can leach below the rooting zone. So that's the trade-off. So if you use the sulfate form of fertilizer, you can use it right away, but you've got this risk of leaching or loss. If you mind clicking again, you can make another choice in your formulation, and that's with this elemental sulfur. It looks like yellow popcorn kernels. We call it popcorn sulfur out in Arizona where I live. And so we have this elemental sulfur, but there's some trade-offs. If you mind clicking. The trade-off is that elemental sulfur needs to be acted on by microbes, and if you go on the internet, you can actually buy little fuzzy microbes for your kids. Someone had a genius idea to make little fuzzy microbes, and those are bad ones. Those are like the ones that cause strep throat and like wound infections. Those aren't friendly soil microbes. So no one's made soil-friendly microbes yet, so someone with an eye for business, there you go, another business idea. So the elemental sulfur needs to be transformed into sulfate. And that's where the challenge is, because you put that elemental sulfur down, it's not immediately plant available. You've got to wait for that transformation to happen. And that's where this technology advantage lies, if you don't mind clicking. Where you have these formulations in this elemental space, and that's what Nutrien's been working on with our MAP plus MST product. We have plots out at the Grand Farm demo area, if you want to go check them out. So we have the formulation that can really speed up the transformation by the microbes, but resist that leaching. So by the time your crop needs it, you can apply these elemental sulfurs in the fall and have it ready for spring use when the crop's growing. So lots of innovation here. If you mind clicking, I'll go to my last slide. Some questions to ask here, and this is where there's this whole tech space can get involved, helping growers understand what's my risk of shortage, and that's with soil sampling, precision agriculture, drones, satellite flights. Where's the shortage going to be on my farm, and how bad is it going to be? What's the degree of shortage? And we can also use our soil samples to look at carryover and our crop demand. Certain crops need more sulfur than others. One piece I think to keep in mind, every grower, how much time do I have? And every grower is different. Some growers want to solve that issue right when they see the sulfur deficiency, and that's where that sulfate form might be a good use of formulation. But if you want to apply your sulfur in the fall, because that's when you run your logistics, that's where that elemental form can work, and that's where that MAP plus MST in our formulation innovation pipeline can come into play. So one more slide here. I have a QR code. I promise there's nothing weird. It's just the sulfur toolbox. If you are working in this sulfur space or with growers and nutrient programs, this QR code contains a number of tools that can help introduce the topic and help point you in that technical direction to make sure you're choosing the right formulation and not causing that 34 bushel an acre yield loss. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.